What's up, y'all? It's your most Desmos. Crispy. Welcome back to that video. NFL stories. Why the NFL sometimes need villains. Let's see what's going on with this. If you're new to the channel, make sure you like, comment, subscribe. We're on the road to 500. And, also tell your friend to a family that your boy Crispy is on his way. Let's see what's going on with this.
Every great roster has that one player the opposing team truly dreaded seeing on the field. This is about the player who forced you to think twice before running a route over the middle or trying to get comfortable at the line of scrimmage. The NFL markets itself as a safe and family-friendly product, endorsed by massive brands that avoid controversy at all costs. But if you look at the teams that actually win, they almost always have someone who didn't care about being liked. The truth is, these guys are always necessary for an NFL team to reach its highest level, but also some of these guys are double-edged swords and costed their team at the end. We're going to break down exactly how that happened. Before Jack Tatum arrived, the Raiders in the early 70s looked like a team that was actually great on paper, but just couldn't quite get over the hump yet. They were loaded with talent, yet opposing offenses could work the middle of the field without worrying about any real consequences. Quarterbacks threw underneath with ease, and receivers ran crossing routes without ever looking over their shoulders. Oakland was good enough to beat the bad teams, but they weren't physical enough to actually scare the great ones. Everything changed when Tatum came out of Ohio State in 1971, already carrying the nickname The Assassin. That wasn't just some clever media invention, because it was actually his stated identity on the field.
That boy look like that nigga look like he could be I Am Cherry Dad. Hold on.
It was actually his stated identity on the field. He described his approach very plainly by saying every hit should be a collision assassin. That wasn't just some clever
Dad serious. That boy look like he could be I Am Cherry Dad, bro.
For media invention, because it was actually his stated identity on the field. He described his approach very plainly by saying every hit should be a collision the receiver still remembers on the bus ride home. He wasn't looking for a simple tackle, he wanted a collision, and every receiver in the AFC learned the difference between those two things very quickly. The impact on the Raiders was structural rather than just emotional. Receivers stopped running free over the middle of the field, which meant routes got shorter and quarterbacks who usually attack the seam started looking elsewhere. You won't find that specific intimidation factor in a box score, but you definitely feel it over the course of a full season. Jack finished his career with
I am not gonna hold you saying that right there, he would have got thrown out the game. Like
37 interceptions and 3 Pro Bowls, with those numbers proving his reputation was backed up by elite production. The 1976 season was the moment it all finally clicked for the franchise. Oakland finished with a 13-1 record before running through the playoffs to win Super Bowl 11. Jack served as the anchor for that secondary, and the Raiders finally became the dominant force everyone expected them to be. The physical identity he established was the glue that held the entire defensive structure together. Then everything changed on August 12, 1978.
Imagine being able to build an app with your name on it, just by thinking about it. Meet Base 44.
During a preseason game, Steve Grogan threw a high pass to Darryl Stingley, and Tatum delivered a legal hit as Stingley crossed the middle. However, Darryl never got up, and the hit left him a quadriplegic for the rest of his life. Even though the hit was within the rules of that era, it was the kind of exact blow Tatum had been delivering his entire career on purpose. The public turned on him permanently after that moment, and Tatum famously never apologized for his aggressive style of play. He wrote in his own book that he always wanted the receiver to feel the impact because that was the entire point of his job. The fact he never addressed the tragedy more directly is something that followed his legacy until the day he died. Teammates and opponents alike admitted he was one of the most respected players in the league during his prime. The intimidation worked, and the championship rings proved it. However, there is a version of the story where
Nah, son. Bruh, that man real life just caught back and punched that man.
The championship rings proved
Dang!
it. However, there is a version of the story where a man simply picks up a phone to make things right, and the legacy lands much differently. When the Raiders lost that specific edge going into the late 1980s, the defense never found the same identity again. They still had plenty of talent, but they weren't feared anymore. And it turns out those two are very different things. Jack Tatum showed the entire league what a single enforcer in the secondary can do, but Bill Romanowski showed the entire league what a virus can do once it seeps into the locker room and then starts infecting everything around it. San Francisco 49ers of the late 1980s didn't actually need Romanowski to be a superstar because they already had Joe Montana and Jerry Rice. Talent was never the problem for those teams, but Romanowski gave them something much harder to find through the draft or free agency. He brought a standard that made softness unacceptable even during a Tuesday practice, and he hit his own teammates at a level that constantly made the coaching staff visibly uncomfortable. Players learned very quickly that if they took a single rep off anywhere near him, they were going to feel it, and that edge eventually became the entire culture of the team. His weekly preparation went way beyond just studying film or walking through plays. Romanowski has described his process openly, explaining how he spent the days leading up to the game deliberately building a deep hatred for the opposing team. This wasn't just a competitive focus or professional intensity, but genuine, raw hatred that he manufactured through his own mental exercises. By the time Sunday arrived, he wasn't just performing for pure aggression for the cameras, but was
Nah, yeah, I ain't lying to you. I see why dudes be going low, getting lower and lower, bro. I'll be getting lower too, saying, I ain't gonna hold you.
By the time Sunday arrived, he wasn't just performing for pure aggression for the cameras, but was instead running on a fuel that most players could never even tap into. There's specific incidences from his career that are still hard to watch today. During a 1997 preseason game, he hit Carolina Panthers quarterback Kerry Collins so hard that his jaw broke in 2 places, which is an insane level of violence for a game that doesn't even count. When reporters asked if his fine would change how he played, he told them that the next time he saw Collins, he would actually simply try harder to hit him. That wasn't just a hot take for the media, but a core part of his philosophy. Later that same year on Monday Night Football, he spit directly into the face of J.J. Stokes during a pileup, an act that the whole country saw on national TV. Then in 2003, while practicing with the Oakland Raiders, he punched teammate Marcus Williams in the face and shattered his eye socket.
Nah, that's crazy.
That punch ended Williams' career and led to a lawsuit that eventually settled for $400,000. You have to ask what these teams actually got in exchange for all that chaos, and the answer is 4 Super Bowl rings, with 2 coming from San Francisco and 2 more in Denver. He recorded 39.5 career sacks as a linebacker across 16 seasons, and he remarkably never missed a single game during that entire stretch. When the Broncos won back-to-back championships in 97 and 98, the players on that roster talked constantly about the standard Romanowski held everyone to. His intensity was never a distraction to the locker room because it was contagious, and the teams that play with a genuine edge are always harder to beat than the teams.
And you say Ray Lewis could hit harder like this? Nah, hey, mess with that boy Bell right here. What? Hey.
Talent alone. The Balco steroid case eventually complicated his legacy. He admitted to using performance-enhancing substances, which forced everyone to look at his durability and aggression through a completely different lens. By the time Romanowski finished his final season in Oakland after 2003, his body was physically broken. He has since admitted that his own brain started failing him as the concussions he suffered finally began collecting their debt. Every franchise he played for during his prime years was championship level, but he typically didn't leave without an incident. Whether those 2 facts belong in the same sentence as a fair trade-off is a question that every fan has to sit with. Romanowski's edge lived on the defensive side of the football, and it was based off of pure hatred and a willingness to hurt people. Hines Ward brought that exact same intensity, except it was for the wide receiver position, which is what made it really strange. For years, the league had conditioned fans and players to think of receivers as finesse athletes who were essentially untouchable. Ward broke that assumption on every single snap he played, and the wildest part was, he did it all with wearing a huge smile. The Steelers of the late 1990s were a heavy running team with the passing game that defenses only respected as much as they absolutely had to. Ward arrived as a 3rd-round pick in 1998, which is usually the kind of pick teams use on a role player who will not embarrass the franchise. He was never supposed to be the face of the team, but he became something the NFL didn't even have a rule for.
Dang!
His reputation wasn't built on his route running or how many yards he gained after the catch. Instead, his name was made by what he did when the ball was going to someone else on the field. Hines would find a linebacker flowing towards the ball carrier and wait until that defender's eyes were completely off of him before delivering the hardest hit possible. These hits were technically clean and legal for most of his career, and he delivered them with a genuine enthusiasm that made the experience worse for the guy getting hit. You weren't just getting blocked out of the play, you were getting embarrassed by a wide receiver who clearly loved every second of that contact. In 2008, Ward delivered a blindside block on Bengals rookie linebacker Keith Rivers that broke his jaw and ended his entire season. There was no flag on the play, but the league fined Ward $15,000 afterwards as a way of admitting that they were not sure how to handle that level of violence from a wide receiver. The following year, nearly 300 NFL players voted in a Sports Illustrated poll to name the dirtiest player in the league. Ward received more votes than anyone else, including the defensive linemen who were actively trying to take off quarterbacks' heads.
Nah, just imagine you about to get a tackle, and then like a wide receiver come out of nowhere. Boom! I'm like, golly, nah, son. I ain't gonna hold you, son. You gotta watch out because they got some dirty people that do that.
Defenders understood something that casual fans often miss, which was that Ward was hunting them instead of the other way around. Pittsburgh got a complete player in return for that style of play. He finished his career with 1,000 receptions and over 12,000 yards. He walked away with 2 Super Bowl rings and a Super Bowl MVP trophy. But the stat that actually mattered most was the one that nobody tracked. You couldn't measure how many times a linebacker hesitated to move up and run support, because they knew that Ward was lurking in the area. Defenders had to account for his location on every single snap regardless of where the ball was going. The rulebook literally had to be changed because of him. After Ward retired in the following 2011 season, the Steelers never found a true replacement. The offense certainly got faster and more explosive, but it also became much more predictable for opposing coordinators. None of the receivers who followed him in Pittsburgh made a linebacker think twice about crouching down on a run play. Hines Ward played the role of a villain with a sense of control, and for 14 years he knew exactly where the line was, right over it, which sometimes happened quite literally.
Ooh.
Both of these guys completely transformed
Dang.
franchises that were desperate for a new identity, but they also became the primary reason those transformations eventually fell apart. Back in 2012, the Cincinnati Bengals were a team stuck in the middle, trying to prove they belonged with the heavy hitters in the AFC. Burfict entered the league as an undrafted free agent, and that tells you everything you need to know about how teams viewed his behavioral red flags at Arizona State. The Bengals decided the talent was worth the headache, and for a few seasons, they were absolutely right. His 2013 campaign was easily one of the most dominant linebacker performances we've seen in the modern era, finishing with 171 tackles and an all-pro second-team selection. However, the most important stat from that year never showed up in a box score or a post-game recap. Former safety Matt Bowen once pointed out that having Burfict in the middle of the field was basically a gift for the rest of the secondary. Receivers who usually lived in the middle of the field started taking shorter routes to avoid him, and running backs would instinctively cut away from the side of the formation. The Bengals improved because opposing offenses became terrified to take risks, and that kind of influence you just can't manufacture with a defensive scheme. But everything changed on January 9, 2016 during a wild-card matchup against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Burfict launched himself and Antonio Brown for a helmet-to-helmet that drew a 15-yard penalty and handed the game to Pittsburgh. The very thing that made him a star, which was that total refusal to pull up or consider the consequences, cost his team the one goal they had been building.
And then after that, I think another game after that, that next season, Juju hit that boy, the same person. He hit him. Boom! I'm like, ooh, that's karma. That's football and that's karma.
By the time his career ended, his fines totaled nearly $4 million, and he had missed more than 10 games because of various legal suspensions.
Oh, wow.
The NFL finally banned him for good in 2019 after a hit on Jack Doyle, in the play the league front office decided was the final straw for a repeat offender. Once Burfict was gone, the Bengals went right back to being a bad team with no fear factor until Joe Burrow arrived to fix the culture. The edge he provided was real, but the cost of not being able to turn it off was just as high. And Ndamukong Suh followed a similar path, though he actually has a little bit of a twist because he never got banned permanently, and he won a championship ring. The difference is that he didn't win it with a team that needed his presence the most. The 2009 Detroit Lions were a disaster, finishing 2-14 and looking completely irrelevant to the rest of the league. They had no identity and gave opponents zero reasons to worry when they saw Detroit on the schedule. Suh arrived as a second overall pick in 2010 and changed that culture within a month, winning Defensive Rookie of the Year while racking up 10 sacks. He was a force of nature who demanded double teams on every single snap, which freed up everyone on the defensive line to make plays. For 2 years in a row, his own peers voted him the dirtiest player in the NFL, and the tape showed exactly why they felt that way. There was an infamous Thanksgiving stomp in 2011 that got him suspended, and then the incident where he stepped on Aaron Rodgers' ankle in 2014.
All right, now, come on, bro. Come on now, bro. It was not that personal to step on somebody's ankle, bro. Not gonna hold you. He would have stepped on my ankle. I would have got back up, and me and him would have both got put out the game. Not gonna hold you. Especially let it be 2 minutes and 41 seconds left in that mug. I promise you, me and him gonna get the scrapping. I ain't lying to you. If I was Aaron Rodgers, I would be pressing that man after the game. I would get a bunch of my teammates. We would jump this man. I'm not playing with you. No, you ain't about to step on my ankle. I gotta walk. I gotta play the next game.
In the extra shots after the whistle, he racked up over $400,000 in fines during his time in Detroit alone. Even with the drama, the Lions made the playoffs in 2011 for the first time in over a decade, because a defensive tackle like Suh changed the math for every offensive coordinator in the league. The problem was that the Lions simply couldn't build a complete roster around him fast enough to capitalize on his prime. Suh eventually left for Miami in 2015 to chase a massive contract that Detroit wasn't willing to match. He eventually did win a Super Bowl with Tampa Bay in 2020, but he did it as a piece of a veteran roster built around Tom Brady. These were two players who rebuilt entire franchises around their aggressive style, but both organizations felt the floor fall out the moment the edge was gone. The lesson here isn't that you shouldn't have a villain on your roster. It's that they work perfectly fine up until the moment that they don't. And by that time, the team is usually paid a massive price. While Sue and Perfect actually burned out because they got too close to the sun, the modern villains in the NFL actually are a little bit more calculated. This new template involves the same aggressive edge, but adds a level of self-awareness.
Jalen Ramsey.
And Jalen Ramsey is a perfect example of how this formula can lead to a championship. The 2016 Jacksonville Jags were a soft team, which is what happens to small market franchises that stay irrelevant for far too long. They had no real identity and no players that kept opposing coaches up at night until Ramsey arrived as a 5th overall pick. He didn't just play well, he started picking fights on purpose to get under everyone's skin. He famously did an interview where he trashed half the quarterbacks in the league, calling Joe Flacco mediocre and rookie Josh Allen trash. He didn't hide behind anonymous sources, and while the league saw it as a distraction, Ramsey saw it as a part of
We watched a video of Jalen Ramsey. So if y'all probably didn't know, we did watch a video of Jalen Ramsey. So just type your crispy react to Jalen Ramsey. It's gonna be right
game
there.
backed up every single word he said. He earned 3 first-team All-Pro nods and 7 Pro Bowl selections because the completion percentages plummeted whenever a quarterback was brave enough to throw his way. The Jags eventually made the AFC Championship game in 2017, and they were only one Tom Brady comeback away from reaching the Super Bowl. A franchise that had been dormant for years almost reached the mountaintop because they had a cornerback who trash-talked and then backed it up with elite coverage. Eventually, he forced a trade to the Rams, signed a $100 million deal, and won a Super Bowl in the 2021 season while shadowing Jamar Chase all night. He since hasn't been as impactful for his other teams, but he's still been pretty solid. The villain who refused to apologize for his attitude ended up with one thing that every player in the league is chasing, and that's Lombardi. George Pickens is currently making the same argument to be a villain, and even though he's only a few years into his career, the pattern is already there. Pittsburgh took him in the second round and immediately got 1,100 yards of production despite a rotating door of struggling quarterbacks. He made catches that looked impossible, the kind of one-handed grabs that most receivers wouldn't even attempt for fear of looking bad on a drop. He posted "Free me" on his social media when he wasn't getting the ball, and he picked up fines for his celebrations, making it clear he wasn't going to play the humble rookie role. The Steelers really hadn't had that kind of confrontational energy in their wide receiver room since the days of Antonio Brown. Pickens brought that fire back in a different way. In a league where the rules made it harder and harder to play physical football, having a receiver who treats every single snap like a street fight is a massive advantage. That isn't a liability for a team, it's a competitive edge if the coaching staff is smart enough to manage a personality. Eventually he wore thin with the Steelers locker room, but that's pretty much because the production didn't match the antics anymore. We still don't know if Pickens will end up with a Super Bowl ring like Ramsey did. He found his way to force himself to be traded to the Cowboys, and since he's on the Cowboys, he probably won't win a Super Bowl. However, the reason you want a guy like him on the roster is the same reason every other player in this video was so valuable. You need someone who isn't afraid to be the bad guy if it means winning the game. The pattern holds firm from the era of Jack Tatum all the way to George Pickens. If you look at the teams that win consistently, they almost always have that one player opponents absolutely dread facing, even if that person is a nightmare.
Yep. But hope y'all enjoyed the video. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. Follow our social media that pop on the screen. We're on the road to 500. Dang, that's some more crazy villains into the NFL spot. But I'm out.